This Week in Japan is presented by the Japan Center for Information and Cultural Affairs and is brought to you by Sagawa Express, Evergreen Shipping, Zenshu, the Central Union of Agricultural Cooperatives, Omron Tatashi Electronics Company, Mitsubishi Motors, and by Kirin Brewery.
This is Harajuku, one of Tokyo's top fashion districts. Japanese fashion used to follow in the footsteps of Western trendsetters, but now the tables are turning as the West looks to Japan for fashion inspiration. In the world of fashion, made in Japan is beginning to mean top design and quality merchandise.
In our first report, a look at the Japanese fashion industry, coming up on This Week in Japan.
Mysteries of the ancient East appear before your eyes. Enchantment and rare qualities are here. You're searching for the perfect brew that slakes and satisfies. It's that 100-year-old art called herein beer. And it's here. Oh, it's Kirin. When you're beer, Kirin, handcrafted in Japan.
Taste what you only imagined. Kirin, the great beer of Japan.
Whether you're a big company or a little girl, Omron helps pay the bills, send the mail, and show the love that you feel for others. One of the world's largest manufacturers of control components, Omron is there when you need it, where you need it.
Japan is a country of great beauty and feeling. Kyoto is an ancient city that many Japanese love to go to. In the world of freight, Sagawa Express is the best. Sagawa Express, carrying Japanese goodwill.
The Japanese are becoming widely known for their stylish dress and their expensive taste for fashion. Western fashion prevails in Japan, where not long ago the traditional kimono was a common sight among women here. The Japanese sense for high fashion has become so sophisticated that some European design houses claim Japan as their #1 market. Western design houses have dominated the fashion scene for years, but now the glove is on the other hand. Japan's fashion designers in the past, labeled as imitators of Western style, have become so successful that they in turn have become the target of copycat raiders from Europe and North America. Boutique owners in Tokyo have become used to visits by Western designers who rummage through their clothing racks without trying anything on. Their response is amusement, not anger. In Japan, imitation is regarded as a sincere form of flattery. Suzanne Magnuson is a fashion expert and columnist for the Tokyo Weekender newspaper. She says Japanese design concepts are rooted in culture and tradition.
If you take modern fashion coming from Japan, the concept, I don't say it looks like kimono, it doesn't look anything like kimono, but the patterning, how is it put together, is done in a flat concept. You can take all of these clothes and fold them up. You can put them in your suitcase. They're great for traveling because they fold so easily. You don't have to worry about this big shoulder getting wrecked in the packing in the suitcase. So what happens when you put flat patterned clothing on the body is it drapes. It flops, it flows, it angles. And this is the look that's coming out of Japan today. And it has nothing to do with kimono, but the way it's assembled has a deep-rooted idea of clothing assembly from this country.
Magnuson says until recently, talented Japanese designers virtually had to make their mark in Paris or New York before their fellow countrymen took notice. The prevailing attitude was that if Westerners liked it, the Japanese would follow suit. Among the most famous of the Japanese designs are those of Hanai Mori. Kai Mori and other leading Japanese designers such as Kenzo Takara and Kansai Yamamoto have paved the way for a new wave of Japanese talent now gaining international recognition. Among the hottest is Yoji Yamamoto. Speaking of his designs, Yamamoto says he is working at the essence of things, and he says this is often misunderstood. He says it is always distorted, and he adds there may be a pure artistic reason for the designers to cut or make rags out of fabrics. But when it becomes fashion, he says it is totally misunderstood. He adds that it becomes the rag look, or is called the beggar look, and he says it is very dangerous and regrettable. Another rising star in the Japanese fashion industry is Yuya Nagahata. He is best known for using old kimono fabric in his designs. Nagahata says he has always been fond of old Japanese fabric, and when he decided to use them in his creations, most people could not appreciate them. But now he says the tide has turned, and he is experiencing a newfound popularity. Still another of the new wave designers in Japan is Junko Koshino. She and her two sisters, Hiroko and Michiko, are making their mark on the international fashion scene. Junko's fall-autumn-winter collection, entitled Volcanic, erupted onto the scene at a recent showing in Paris. She says the themes of balance and unbalance in design are very important, adding that people look at Japan because of the beauty of unbalance. She says symmetry, according to rules, is Western, but asymmetry, the beauty of unbalance, is something one can only appreciate with the eye. That, she says, is a Japanese concept.
The key here is there isn't any restriction in the thinking. And again, we've seen that in other industries in Japan. So I think that there is much more depth still to come. I think some people will just weed out, and well, that always happens. But my prediction would be that there's still a lot to come from this country in fashion.
And while the Japanese fashion industry continues to blossom, there are many Japanese sports fans who hope there will be a lot coming from the bats of their favorite foreign players in Japan. A look at Americans in Japanese baseball when This Week in Japan continues.
Meet the green line that circles the earth with comprehensive container shipping services. Evergreen. The Evergreen serves the United States from offices located in 20 major cities, linking you with the world through regular service to Europe, Mediterranean Sea, the Middle East, Caribbean Sea, and the Far East. That's Evergreen. The first shipping company in the world to offer global shipping services. That's Evergreen. The container shipping company serving greater world trade. The Green Line, Evergreen.
Japan is a country of great beauty and feeling. Kyoto is an ancient city that many Japanese love to go to. In the world of freight, Sagawa Express is the best. Sagawa Express, carrying Japanese goodwill.
Mitsubishi brings a new dimension to driving. Turbotronics. Sculpted from the block up to meet the stringent demands of turbocharging. Built from more than 4 decades of turbo-making experience to bring turbocharger design and performance to the leading edge. With microcomputer-controlled injection for maximum response and economy. That's Turbotronics. Discover the new dimension in driving for yourself. Turbocharging with brains. Turbotronics from Mitsubishi.
The Tokyo Yomiuri Giants, Japan's first professional baseball team and still the most popular, are celebrating their golden anniversary this year with 23 pennants under their belts. Since its founding in 1934, professional baseball has become one of the most successful U.S. cultural imports to Japan. The game is avidly followed by millions of fans and receives primetime radio and television coverage. As many as 50,000 spectators flock to Tokyo's Korakuen Stadium to see the Giants play. Although the origin of baseball in Japan is a matter of dispute, it is most widely believed to have been introduced by American missionaries in Japanese universities in the late 1800s. The game gradually caught on, and since then, Japan has turned America's national pastime into one of the nation's most popular sports. Although touring American pro teams visited Japan as early as 1908, it remained a strictly amateur sport here until the 1930s. But today, Japanese Major League Baseball is anything but amateur. The teams are sponsored by powerful companies, newspapers, department store railroad concerns, filmmakers, and even a whaling company. Professional baseball in Japan is split into the Central and Pacific Leagues, which now have 6 teams each. At the end of a 130-game season in October, the winners meet in the 7-game Japan Series. And although the Japanese have changed a few rules to suit their style of play, there are still many American-style throwbacks in their game, including some of their best players. Wayne Grassick is sports editor for the English-language Tokyo Weekender newspaper. A 15-year resident of Japan, he's considered to be one of the most knowledgeable foreigners about Japanese baseball. He says American players were first brought to Japan in the 1950s, and they've been coming ever since, and as of today, there are some 250 former American Major League players who have played in Japan over the past 35 years. But as in the case of other American imports, Japan has restricted the number of foreigners per team. Only 2 per customer, please.
I think if they had an unlimited number of American players allowed in Japanese baseball, it would sort of take away from the theme of it being Japanese. Certainly, I would think each team would probably go for 5 or 6 American players, starters on their team if they had no limit. And so I think that's not good for Japanese baseball because, after all, 99.9% of the fans are Japanese and they like to identify with their own personal heroes and, the hometown boys. So they limit the number of American players to 2.
One of the 2 Americans on the Tokyo Giants team is former Los Angeles Dodgers star Reggie Smith. In his 2nd year in the Japanese League, the heavy hitter slugged 28 homers last season and expects to hit about 40 this year. Reportedly earning as much as $800,000 a year, far more than any Japanese player, Smith is worth his weight to the Giants. He says he's impressed with the caliber of play in the Japanese major leagues, but makes it clear that there are distinct differences in U.S. and Japanese baseball.
Baseball is considered here pretty much on a major league level, but I think realistically, they're still a little bit behind. Some of the technical skills that's necessary to compete at a level that I think a major league class, they lack that. And it's mainly due to the fact that they've never really had the opportunity to express individuality, something that you need to improve yourself to be able to play the game in a team concept. Here it's all team, so therefore every movement and all movements that they make are pretty much orchestrated and developed by someone else. There are some good players over here. The star players are pretty much star players anywhere. If there is a tinge of individuality, it shows up in them because they're given a little bit extra in terms of extra batting practice, extra fielding, or whatever they want to do. So they're developing those skills, individually, whereas most players, no, they have to do it within the team concept. But there are some players that could play at the major league level. I think they could field a team of their best players here and be respected in both either the American or National League.
The other American on the Giants team is former Montreal Expo Warren Cromartie, who is making his debut as a teammate of Smith. Cromartie is among 9 newcomers in the Japanese league who have joined 15 other foreign players here, mostly Americans. And coming from America to life in Japan's baseball world does require a few adjustments.
Quite a few. Down from the money part of it, the exchange of money, down to the communication, to the transportation, the food, the difference in time and everything, So it's been quite an adjustment since I've been here since February. Now things are starting to come around and as far as getting adjusted. The first couple months, I must confess, it's a little difficult as far as adjusting. And I'm still learning. Each day something new here. So, that's the part of living, I guess. Right now the language problem is it's a little difficult at times, but they try really hard. You try to communicate in English and they break English down to you in their particular way. So you go pretty much by acting as far as, simulated action. So, these guys have been great. A bunch of young guys I'm playing with, and Sadaharo has been great also. So, every day is a learning progress.
Foreigners, despite Japan's special sense of separateness from the rest of the world, have played an important role in Japanese baseball. Perhaps the most famous athlete in Japan is an immigrant from Taiwan named Wang. He hit 868 home runs for the Tokyo Yomiuri Giants, an international career record, but he did it under an adopted Japanese name, Sadaharu Oh. Today, Oh is the freshman manager of the Giants and is under pressure to lead them into the Japan Series in October, thus earning the right to face the 1983 world champion Baltimore Orioles in what the Giants are dubbing the first real World Series this fall. The Japanese fan takes his baseball seriously. After watching a game at the park or on TV at home, the next morning on his way to work, he can choose among 7 daily sports newspapers that stress baseball coverage and catch up on the standings of other teams in the league. The sports newspapers reportedly outsell Tokyo's 10 regular papers at newsstands. And attending a ball game in Japan is really something different.
Well, the fans, when they go to the ball game in Japan, they can find a variety of things for sale. For example, of course, beer, and they sell whiskey and sake in the stands. Also, yakitori, chicken on a stick, and curry rice. And they do have hot dogs, but they're quite different from the ones we have at the ballparks in the States. The corn dogs are very popular here. The cornbread with the hot dog on a stick are popular at Japanese ballparks.
But despite the many differences in style from that in the U.S., the Japan baseball fans have one thing in common with their American counterparts: their undying support for their favorite player, regardless of the name on his back or his foreign roots. One great name with foreign roots is that of American soprano Leontine Price, who performed in Japan for the first time this week. We'll continue our look into Japan's appreciation of foreign artists when This Week in Japan returns.
Japan is a country of great beauty and feeling. Kyoto is an ancient city that many Japanese love to go to. In the world of freight, Sagawa Express is the best. Sagawa Express, carrying Japanese goodwill.
A fact not well known to the American public is that Japan is the world's largest buyer of America's agricultural products. In 1982, Japan bought more from the United States in the way of cereal grain, soybeans, and other farm produce than the Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, West Germany, and Britain combined. The total amount was $6.5 billion. The very existence of the Japanese people depends on American farm production. Japan imports over 90% of its soybeans, 88.4% of the feed for Japanese livestock, 90% of the wheat for bread and noodles from America. In the national interest, almost all countries, including the U.S., have varying degrees of import restrictions. But by and large, Japan is one of the world's most open markets and the biggest market for the American farmer.
Leontine Price, universally regarded as one of the greatest artists of all time, made her debut in Japan to one of the most prolonged demonstrations of enthusiasm ever witnessed here. More than 40 minutes of encores and ovations.
The audiences have been absolutely fantastic. They respond to, I knew that they loved Western music, but I had no idea that this particular response would be as positive and as outgoing as has been for me. I'm very fortunate.
The only opera singer to have received 20 nominations and 16 Grammy Awards, Leontine Price is no stranger to high praise. She is the first opera star to have received America's highest civilian award, the Medal of Freedom. She has sung in the greatest opera houses in the world with major symphony orchestras and recitals in leading cities of the globe. But it was to Japan and its people that Leontine Price gave praise after experiencing her maiden voyage here.
The current culture, which is exemplary in the last 50 years, shall we say, against the backdrop of the old culture, is the most exotic and fascinating thing that has happened to me. To see the lovely kimono grace in the streets, adjacent to and together with the modern dress of the lovely, lovely ladies. The Nagoya Castle, for instance, which was arrayed with sakura, which is cherry blossoms, was one of the most glorious sights I've ever seen in my life.
Miss Price was so moved by the sight of the sakura that she included the song of the cherry blossom in her recitals, singing the lyrics in Japanese to the delight of her audience. But in reflection of their true appreciation for the opera, it was the role which Leontine Price frequently sings in Puccini's Madame Butterfly that the Japanese were waiting to hear the most. The story about a Japanese woman named Cho-Cho-san, the Japanese word for butterfly, and her doomed romance with an American naval officer. And while the Japanese applaud the talent of an American opera star singing an Italian aria about a heartbroken Japanese woman, it is a continuing reflection of their universal appreciation of the arts. In another example of that theme, we'll show you an American resident of Tokyo who has won the hearts of the Japanese through his mastery of their language. This week's profile is of 31-year-old Kent Gilbert, a lawyer from a small town in Utah. He has become one of the hottest foreign talents in Tokyo. Gilbert appears regularly on 3 weekly television programs, has starred in a TV series, written 2 best-selling books, as well as columns for magazines. How does he account for his success?
Well, Japanese have always liked foreign things. The writing system was imported. A lot of the vocabulary was imported. Everything, not everything was brought in, but a lot of stuff was brought in. And especially after the war, a lot of American stuff has come in, and it's become very Americanized.
Another reason for his success is Gilbert's fluency with Japanese. He originally studied the language, preparing for 2 years of missionary work in Japan. He also majored in Japanese before law school.
Up until now, the foreigners have been used, especially on television, mainly just as a sort of to add spice to the program, or just as almost something to make fun of in many cases. But the new gaijin, or the new foreigner, as some people have called it, is a person who can speak Japanese quite well. Almost, I wouldn't say as good as a native, because I think that's impossible, but can speak well enough to function on most any kind of a program. And somebody who's not ugly. They don't have to be Robert Redford, but they shouldn't be ugly. They should have a certain amount of personality that comes through in their Japanese. And they should have another job other than television. They should have a full-time job in some kind of respectable profession.
Gilbert is recognized almost everywhere he goes, and he says there are certain places, especially around young people, that he can't go since it causes too much commotion.
Well, I'm doing 3 regular shows. First thing that I did of any substance was a show called Sekai Maragoto How Much? Anything in the world, how much? We guess the prices of all kinds of off-the-wall things. The second one is this World Now, where we bring in satellite feed from the United States directly and discuss various news topics from all around the world. We show film footage directly as it was shown in the country and provide translation. It's quite interesting. And the other show I do is a show called TV Focus, which is a news magazine type show.
And how long will his love affair with the Japanese last?
It seems to keep growing. I thought maybe we had reached a peak quite a while ago, and we seem to keep going up. I don't know where it will end.
And so it is, this week in Japan. This is Mal Adams, CNN, Tokyo.
This program is presented by the Japan Center for Information and Cultural Affairs in order to create better understanding between Japanese and American peoples. To apply for sponsorship, call Daiichi Kikaku, the sole agent for this program, at these numbers. In New York, at area code 212-757-5444, and in Los Angeles, at area code 213-937-5100.
Japan Shipbuilding Industry Foundation, working to ensure a peaceful world without hunger or sickness, a world with children of healthy minds and bodies.
This Week in Japan is partially subsidized by the Japan Shipbuilding Industry Foundation. This Week in Japan is presented by the Japan Center for Information and Cultural Affairs and is brought to you by Sagawa Express, Zenchu, the Central Union of Agricultural Cooperatives, Evergreen Shipping, Homeran Tatashi Electronics Company, Mitsubishi Motors, and by Kirin Brewery.
Japan has a strong fascination for anything foreign, particularly American. There are few developments in American lifestyles or pop cultures that don't promptly find imitators in Japan. One of the strongest motives for Japan wanting to keep in step with Western ideas is a fear that the nation will not be thought of as truly international. But now, as Japan struggles to wipe out anti-Japanese protectionist sentiment around the world by opening its markets to foreign imports, we'll show you how some very old Japanese ideas are going west. In keeping with that theme, we'll show you the ancient art of kabuki, Japan's traditional performing art with a history of nearly 400 years. You'll also see how that art is being incorporated into American entertainment and how something very new in the American arts is being introduced to Japan.
You'll see how Japan is seeking to further open its markets to the world, and we'll profile an American singer who has had little problem breaking onto the Japanese market. These reports coming up next on This Week in Japan.
And of course
Japan is a country of great beauty and feeling. Kyoto is an ancient city that many Japanese love to go to. In the world of freight, Sagawa Express is the best. Sagawa Express, carrying Japanese goodwill.
Line that circles the earth with comprehensive container shipping services. Evergreen. The Evergreen serves the United States from offices located in 20 major cities, linking you with the world through regular service to Europe, Mediterranean Sea, the Middle East, Caribbean Sea, and the Far East. That's Evergreen. The first shipping company in the world to offer global shipping services. That's Evergreen. The container shipping company serving greater world trade. The Green Line, Evergreen.
Kabuki is Japan's traditional performing art with a history of nearly 400 years. Today, the Kabuki-za, the classical Tokyo theater, is the stronghold and the center of the art of Kabuki for all of Japan. It looks as oriental as it should, though the present building is a 1950 reconstruction. It has 3 blue-roofed gables with ski jump curves, cream-colored concrete columns made to resemble the huge cypress trunks that hold up temples, railings that cross and rise at the corners, and red, white, and blue suspended banners. And inside, a square room that seats more than 2,500 people under a long ribbed ceiling. It is a home for a great art. Kabuki started in the early 17th century with a woman dancer named Okuni, who along with her troupe performed lively dances and erotic skits. It originated in Kyoto as between-the-acts diversions to relieve the seriousness of the no drama. Kabuki attracted prostitutes as actresses, which led to the banishment of the plays as too erotic. Nanette Geller is a Tokyo-based authority of Kabuki and provides an English-language earphone description of the Kabuki performance to visiting tourists. She is also an active member of the International Friends of Kabuki.
Mostly these were troupes of prostitutes who were advertising their wares. They were available after the performance. The government at that time didn't particularly object to prostitution, but they did object to the fights that broke out in the audience over the favors of the women. And so the result was that they prohibited women from appearing on stage.
Geller says that led to companies formed only of boys, which proved even more immoral. Even today, Kabuki roles are played strictly by males. They even play the roles of women characters.
They developed a technique for playing the female roles that allowed them to portray women not as real women. Their actions were not at all realistic. They were portraying a male ideal of a woman. And they developed a very beautiful, stylized way of acting that really became an intrinsic part of the Kabuki. It's integral to the Kabuki theater, so that when women were permitted on the stage in Japan in the Meiji era, really, if they had started to have actresses in kabuki, the actresses would have had to play the roles not as women, but as the onagata, the female role specialist. Style or the entire balance of the production would have been destroyed. That's why women are on the kabuki stage.
Kabuki is a highly stylized art form. It is a family profession, and it is usually only those from the families who get the major roles in kabuki plays. There are basically three types of kabuki themes: history plays, domestic plays, and dance dramas.
Particular dance, the actor is imitating a puppet, a marionette. The dance is based on the class of dances called sambaso. There's many sambaso dances, which in fact were originally derived from a no play. But this is a dance of a puppet dancing the kabuki dance sambaso. And in it we see the puppet handler, the stage manager, who comes out and brings the puppet to life, holds the strings, and untangles the strings every time they get tangled. There's one point where the strings break and he reties the strings. So it's very amusing. Towards the end, there's a very lively foot stamping section. This foot stamping is an intrinsic part of the sambaso dance. It represents rice planting. It's a felicitous dance. But towards the end, where the puppet is stamping his feet, because the puppet, of course, would not make any sound with his feet, the stage assistant stamps his feet in unison. So it has many unusual features.
It is a scene of an actor imitating a puppet, imitating an actor. Kabuki is total entertainment, not just the beautiful visuals, but the sounds which are just as important. The music of the drums, flutes, and the shamisen, a three-stringed instrument made of catskin. Today, kabuki is being performed in English in some places in the United States and around the world, mostly universities. And some of the masters of the Japanese art have taught foreign students. But kabuki cannot be taught by words or books. It requires devotion, dedication, and discipline. One needs to master control of the movements of the body, including the eyes and fingers. Subtle movements of the minor parts of the body can give the audience an indescribably strong and lasting impression. Kabuki is anciently wise in the magic of theater. When we return, we'll show you a young American magician who has come to Japan to study kabuki, is mixing it with his own act, and is taking it on the road. East meets West in the arts when This Week in Japan continues.
Japan is a country of great beauty and feeling. Kyoto is an ancient city that many Japanese love to go to. In the world of freight, Sagawa Express is the best. Sagawa Express, carrying Japanese goodwill.
Whether you're a big company or a little girl, Omron helps pay the bills, send the mail, and show the love that you feel for others. One of the world's largest manufacturers of control components, Omron is there when you need it, where you need it.
Mitsubishi brings a new dimension to driving. Turbotronics. Sculpted from the block up to meet the stringent demands of turbocharging. Built from more than 4 decades of turbo-making experience to bring turbocharger design and performance to the leading edge. With microcomputer-controlled injection for maximum response and economy. That's Turbotronics. Discover the new dimension in driving for yourself. Turbocharging with brains. Turbotronics from Mitsubishi.
Japan is a country of great beauty and feeling. Kyoto is an ancient city that many Japanese love to go to. In the world of freight, Sagawa Express is the best. Sagawa Express, carrying Japanese goodwill.
24-year-old Jeff McBride is a young American magician who has come all the way from New York City to Tokyo to study the magical movements of kabuki. Through a creative fusion of kabuki choreography and pantomime, McBride is enhancing his act of illusions, sleight of hand, and dance. He is no stranger to Japan, having performed his magic act at Tokyo's world-famous Mikado nightclub twice in the past 2 years. But he says he first got the idea of meshing Eastern arts with Western styles when he ventured off to Japan for the first time at the age of 16.
Well, when I first started doing magic, I wanted to take magic further, so I started combining it with martial arts, which I had taken, judo and aikido and karate, taekwondo. And I started combining it with pantomime. This was back in 1976. And when I first came to Japan and I saw some kabuki, and the kabuki movements were so close to, they were so magical, the stage effects that they did, along with the type of movement, which was so mime-like and dance-like. It seemed to go very naturally with Western mime combined with the theatricality of the kabuki. Last year, when I was working at the Mikado nightclub, the owner of the Mikado nightclub, Sachiko Kanami, took me to Kabukiza once again. Hadn't been there since 1976. And she introduced me to some of the more famous actors. Inosuke is a very famous actor, and this time I met Tamasaburo Bando, who became a friend of mine and helped me a lot with my movements and taught me more of the philosophies behind, the reasons for the movements and, the traditional values behind, the magic of the kabuki. So I use this as one of the segments of my show. I do an Eastern segment, kind of combined with Western influences also. And the audience seems to really love it, and I'm very excited doing it.
While McBride continued his study of kabuki with the masters, he and his associates were documenting his experience in Japan on film. McBride's new 4-member act is a mixture of ancient kabuki movements and pop culture dances. Popping, locking, breaking, and the electric boogie. They brought it from the streets of New York City to the streets of Tokyo, and the Japanese were all eyes.
teaching the Japanese here, and wherever we meet them, the kids are breakdancing, and we're learning, Japanese theater and learning to appreciate that, and we're showing them our new forms, and they're combining it with what they already know. It happens all the time. We're filming a special for eventual maybe cable release or network release in New York called Magic of Japan, which is an hour story of a bunch of street performers from New York, which the rest of the performers in our show, Lockatron John Christian and Extra, who are break dancers, Alice Farley, who did the costume designs and choreographed a lot of it, she does stilt dancing, and myself, we're all one-time street performers, and we all meet in New York and come to Japan and learn about Japan and teach Japan about what we know, and it's an exchange going on there. And everywhere we go, we're filming and picking up a lot of information and turning a lot of people on to a lot of good magic.
Once the filming of McBride's street routine was completed, he took his act to one of Tokyo's top discos, where he gave a final performance for his new Japanese friends and fans. It was in appreciation for all the magic of Japan that he was able to learn and take back to America with him. But he would not return without leaving something uniquely American with the Japanese. When we return, we'll show you how the Japanese are opening up to a variety of foreign items, but on a much higher level. Japan's government is seeking to ease trade disputes with its economic partners with a new market opening package. That story when This Week in Japan continues.
A fact not well known to the American public is that Japan is the world's largest buyer of America's agricultural products. In 1982, Japan bought more from the United States in the way of cereal grain, soybeans, and other farm produce than the Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, West Germany, and Britain combined. The total amount was $6.5 billion. The very existence of the Japanese people depends on American farm production. Japan imports over 90% of its soybeans, 88.4% of the feed for Japanese livestock, 90% of the wheat for bread and noodles from America. In the national interest, almost all countries, including the U.S., have varying degrees of import restrictions. But by and large, Japan is one of the world's most open markets and the biggest market for the American farmer.
Mysteries of the ancient appear before your eyes. Enchantment and rare qualities are here. You're searching for the perfect brew that slakes and satisfies. It's that 100-year-old art called herein beer. And it's here. Oh, it's herein. When you're herein, handcrafted in Japan.
Taste what you only imagined. Herein, the great beer of Japan.
Japan has adopted a new market opening package aimed at reducing trade friction with the United States and Western Europe and improving economic relations with Southeast Asian nations. The package consists of 15 measures classified into 6 categories. The 6 categories are further opening of the Japanese market and promotion of imports, greater foreign access to the Japanese high technology market, opening of the domestic financial and capital market and promotion of the yen's internationalization, promotion of mutual investment, stepped up cooperation with other countries in energy trade, and finally a study on the advisability of allowing foreign lawyers to engage in legal business in Japan. Japan's new economic package comes against the backdrop of smoldering trade friction with its major trading partners and growing protectionist sentiment in the United States. In many cases, Japanese reluctance to satisfy requests for it to expand its imports of foreign goods had reached the breaking point. Negotiations had stalled or dragged on slowly, and Japan's trading partners were becoming increasingly frustrated with the process. U.S. Trade Representative William Brock had said only 1 month ago that Japan's failure to compromise was tempting fate and could eventually lead to tragedy for Japan, for the United States and for the trading system. But following the announcement of Japan's latest market opening measures, Brock's comments were more positive. Although U.S. officials were still studying the details of the new package, Brock told reporters that the bulk of it looked pretty good, adding that it seemed to address some of the principal areas of concern. Brock had reason for optimism over Japan's apparent changing tune, having just 3 weeks prior secured an important agreement on beef and citrus exports to Japan. Enough optimism for him to proclaim that Vice President George Bush's trip to Japan this week would be very friendly. Japan, worried about its declining image on the world economic scene, was also hopeful for a positive reaction to its new package from visiting Vice President Bush. Hiroshi Ota, Deputy Director General, Economic Affairs Bureau of Japan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, outlined the government's concerns.
Japan is very much worried about the protectionist tendencies that have been going on in the past few years in the world. We appreciate difficulties that lead to such measures. For instance, unemployment and the difficulty of industrial restructuring. Japan, under such circumstances, has been doing relatively well in the economic performance. So we thought that it is Japan's responsibility to take a number of measures that we believe will contribute to fighting protectionism and also to maintain and further strengthen the free trade system.
Ota says among the items he considers important to the United States are the elimination or reduction of tariffs on 71 products, the measures on high technology, especially those related with the possible purchase by Japan of communications satellites, and the government's decision to make major moves in the field of capital and financial market liberalization. But despite Brock's initial reaction to Japan's promises, his comments were not without some reservations. He described the tariff-cutting measures announced by Japan as too little, too late. He said that none of the tariff reductions would take effect until next year, and that this would delay the efforts of U.S. exporters to gain more access to the Japanese market. On the other hand, there is one area in which Japan is promising complete liberalization. A bill pending in the Japanese parliament, or Diet as it is called, could see an influx of American tobacco products in Japan.
Now the bill is in the Diet, called the Tobacco Business Bill. When this bill is passed, which we expect, then the import of foreign manufactured tobacco will be totally liberalized. Up until now, it has been monopolized by the Japan Monopoly Corporation, but after the bill is passed, there will be a total liberalization. And then we understand that Mr. Brock has expressed full satisfaction on this measure.
And so, Ota says, since Japan has benefited most from the post-war free trade system, the country should contribute to the maintenance of that system by fighting protectionist measures, liberalizing its imports, and further opening its market to the world. This week's profile is with one American product that has been accepted in Japan for years. Joan Shepard is known and loved as Japan's favorite blonde. She first came to Japan in 1964 as the featured singer with the new Glenn Miller Orchestra. Shepard's talent and style won her a job as vocalist for a major cosmetic company's commercial song. It was the first commercial song in Japan to have taken off and become a hit.
It became a gold record. It was a simple song, a very Moon June Spoon type thing called Summer Creation. And when it was aired on television, people would call and they said, where can we buy the record? So Toshiba picked up on it and we recorded it. And it became a gold record. So at that time I thought, well, you know, why go back to New York and, you know, the cattle calls and the central casting, and so I thought I'd give it some time here, and just to see what would happen. And then I met my husband on a television show.
Shepard's marriage to leading Japanese vocalist Masao Sen and her personal talent and charm wooed the Japanese into a long and illustrious love affair. She became a favorite on Japanese talk and game shows.
After 4 years, I gradually found out that I was being known more as a television interviewer or a television talent than as a singer. And this is a mold I wanted to get out of. And I wanted to do reviews and concerts and so forth. So when you're locked into a regular program like that, it is kind of restricting. I couldn't take a vacation. And, but I did it for 4 years, and after 4 years I said, back to music, my first love. And I have been extremely lucky. I thank God every night for being so successful. I've had so many people write to me and they say, everybody wants to come to Japan. I mean, it's the Mecca. Or people who are here and have just been here for a year or so, and they say, how did you do it? How did you get over these barriers and so forth? And I still haven't reached the plateau that I want to. I'm still growing.
And so it is, This Week in Japan. This is Mal Adams, CNN, Tokyo.
This program is presented by the Japan Center for Information and Cultural Affairs in order to create better understanding between Japanese and American peoples. To apply for sponsorship, call Dai-ichi Kikaku, the sole agent for this program, at these numbers. In New York, at area code 212-757-5444, and in Los Angeles, at area code 213-937-5100.
Japan Shipbuilding Industry Foundation, working to ensure a peaceful world without hunger or sickness, a world with children of healthy minds and bodies.
This Week in Japan is partially subsidized by the Japan Shipbuilding Industry Foundation.
From Turner Broadcasting System, this is Cable News Network.
This Week in Japan is presented by the Japan Center for Information and Cultural Affairs and is brought to you by Sagawa Express, Evergreen Shipping, Zenshu, the Central Union of Agricultural Cooperatives, Omron Tatashi Electronics Company, Mitsubishi Motors, and by Kirin Brewery.
Japan's economic growth since World War II and its impact on the world is one of the more profound economic developments of the post-war period. Today, Japan is an enormous economic power. After the United States, it is the free world's largest economy. But Japan's rapid growth has contributed to a tremendous imbalance in world trade. And now the government here is taking steps to remedy that.
In our first report, Vice President George Bush reminds Japan that more needs to be done to ease trade frictions with the U.S. Next, you'll see how Japanese businessmen unwind in the world's largest hostess nightclub. You'll hear U.S. Defense Secretary Caspar Weinberger's views on Japan's defense needs, and we'll profile an American resident of Tokyo who has played host to hundreds of visiting celebrities here. These reports coming up next on This Week in Japan.
Services, Evergreen. The Evergreen serves the United States from offices located in 20 major cities, linking you with the world through regular service to Europe, Mediterranean Sea, the Middle East, Caribbean Sea, and the Far East. That's Evergreen. The first shipping company in the world to offer global shipping services. That's Evergreen. The container shipping company serving greater world trade. The Green Line, Evergreen.
Japan is a country of great beauty and feeling. Kyoto is an ancient city that many Japanese love to go to. In the world of freight, Sagawa Express is the best. Sagawa Express, carrying Japanese goodwill.
Vice President George Bush arrived in Tokyo for a two-day visit this past week to praise Japan for trying to make its markets more open and remind Japanese officials that still more needs to be done. In a meeting with Foreign Minister Shintaro Abe shortly after his arrival at the beginning of a five-nation Asian tour, Bush stressed that problems still plague U.S.-Japan trade ties and warned that the massive U.S. trade deficit with Japan will be an election issue this fall. Bush, who is seeking re-election with President Ronald Reagan, said that the siren call of protection will be heard during the campaign, but pledged to oppose any moves toward anti-Japanese protectionism.
The best way to guarantee against protectionist legislation and acquiescence to protection pressures is to have progress on the remaining trade issues and progress on the remaining financial issues, issues that need to be resolved before Prime Minister Nakasone and Mr. Reagan meet in the UK for the summit.
The trade deficit with Japan accounted for almost one-third of the U.S.'s record $69 billion total in 1983 and is expected to hit $26 billion this year. While Bush praised Japanese Prime Minister Yasuhiro Nakasone for recent market opening measures, he said several issues remain unresolved.
There are a wide array of areas where we would like to see more relief. We certainly give credit and thanks in those areas where there has been relief. But some on the Japanese side will require facilitating legislation to put into effect agreements that have been reached. But in the tariff area and in the international economic area, there still remains a lot to be done.
Bush said that the United States was pleased with the expansion of quotas on beef and oranges, but noted that Japan had only made abstract promises to liberalize capital and financial markets. The U.S. has been urging Japan to make the yen a more usable currency internationally and open up financial markets to foreigners in order to bring the undervalued yen more in line with the dollar. Appreciation of the yen would make U.S. exports to Japan less expensive.